So yeah, I'm Courtney Hurley, three-time Olympian, and I'm fencing, and I hope you enjoyed that demonstration. It's a really fun sport, and that's kind of why I stuck with it for so long, but I'll get into that a little later. Um, uh, so when I was first asked to do this TED Talk, I kind of struggled to think about what I wanted to talk about. Don't get me wrong, I could talk for days about all of my accomplishments and experiences in fencing, how I grew up in a fencing family with our dad, alongside my sister, with our dad as our coach and our mom as the manager. It was really, truly a unique experience, and I could also talk about all of my accomplishments, all of the titles I've collected over the years, such as NCAA champion, world champion, Olympic medalist. I'm a little bit of a collector. And I even got a full scholarship to the University of Notre Dame, which is one of the big reasons why I do suggest épée or fencing to young girls, because the opportunities to go to universities with scholarships is much higher. And so it's a great sport to get into. I could also still talk about all of the travels I've done over the world. Fencing's brought me all over the world with my family. I'll always remember the one time when we were young, we bought an RV, or we rented an RV in Europe, and we just traveled along Europe to different fencing clubs, different fencing competitions. We parked this huge RV in the little streets of like Paris and Madrid, and right outside the fencing club. Like we would wake up, just walk up to the fencing club right outside, and so there's so many endless examples and experiences and traveling like that fencing's brought me, and fencing has just brought me so much happiness. I can't even. I would be here all day if I talked about that. But fencing has also brought me quite a bit of sadness, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about primarily today. More specifically, the pandemic, and I know the pandemic has affected everybody, and I thought it would be interesting to talk about how the pandemic affected my life, my relationship with fencing, and my perspective about the Olympics, because we competed at an Olympics during the pandemic, which is something that was unheard of. So it's an interesting, I thought, more interesting thing to talk about up here. But first, I want to give you a visual. So just picture I'm driving down the coastal highway in my converted van. My dogs are sticking their heads out the window, getting all the ocean breeze. I have a huge smile on my face. I pull over to a grassy area, and I see that my fencing coach is calling me. We really hadn't talked much since 4 months prior, when I left on my van trip, and I knew that this phone call only meant one thing, and that was he was calling to tell me if the Olympics were officially canceled or postponed. This was in February of 2021. So the Olympics had already been postponed a year, but there was uncertainty if it was actually going to happen. So I knew this phone call was the news. And when he told me that the Olympics were officially happening, mind this is February of 2021, you would think that would have made me ecstatic. But really, the first feeling I felt was relief. There had been numerous articles and rumors that the Olympics had been canceled, and those articles and rumors really ate me up. I had quite a bit of meltdowns reading random articles online. The second feeling I felt was anxiety. All of this came rushing back, that I would have to train a second time for an Olympics, and I was in a sort of panic mode because we had a whole year of uncertainty with the pandemic. The world seemed to be almost, ending, it seemed like. And here I was, I had the news that, well, you have to go to the Olympics. You have to qualify. Well, I already qualified, but you have to compete and train for the Olympics a second time. Because mind you, we got the news that the Olympics were canceled only a few months before the Olympics actually happened. So we had already trained our hearts out once before. So I have this panic state, but I want to take a step back though and talk about what my life and perspective with many other millennials out there. Millennials work office jobs that they don't particularly like or are passionate about. they are asked to work 40+ hours a week, and it's rife with politics, disingenuous people, sexual harassment, and general dissatisfaction. So, and I had thought I had avoided all of those things. I thought I have an amazing job, even though it never paid that well. Whenever I combined my finances with my sister and my family pitching in, which I'm so fortunate and lucky to have a family support system, otherwise I would not have been able to do it. I was able to continue the sport that I love for a lot longer than most of my friends. Most people quit after college because there's just no support in the sport. So with all of this, I thought, okay, I have it better than my friends. I'm traveling all the time, even though it's for fencing. I'm still all expense paid to different places in the world, like Paris and Spain and China and Brazil, literally all over the world. Fencing, that's one of the things. Fencing is hard to do because you have to travel all over the world. But after the pandemic and after the postponement and after eventually the Olympic experience in Tokyo, I came to critically think about the Olympics and why that was very similar to many of my millennial friends' jobs. That is that the Olympic enterprise really is kind of a big corporation, and that they put the athletes' well-being and work environment under profit. So profit is more important to them in many instances, just like my millennial friends' jobs. Whenever I was thinking critically about this, I thought, this is so prevalent, and I wasn't really thinking about this whenever I was just in this bubble of thinking everything's good, but this pandemic really put everything in perspective, and I know that did it for a lot of people. It really put things, you prioritize things in your life. You say what makes you happy, what makes you not, and so it really made me critically think about the Olympics. But I want to also start off with the Olympics are something that amateur sports really strive for. Fencers, that's your goal, is the Olympics. That's just what you just believe that the Olympics is some amazing thing, that's the most important competition of your life. And I believe that, growing up in the fencing family, that's just like what it was, the Olympics. But when I qualified for my first Olympics in London, 2012, and when I arrived, I was just totally happy, my first Olympics. It had been my sister's second, but we made history by winning the first medal for the U.S. women's épée team, and because, like I said, there's épée, saber, and foil, so we were the first women's épée to ever win a medal at the Olympics, and so I was just so happy. I won it with my sister, just not thinking about anything besides myself and my family. And I thought that this medal was going to change something. I thought, everyone asked, what happened after? Well, nothing physically changed in my life. No money came my way. We won $10,000 because of this bronze medal, but we actually had to pay income tax on this medal. So not only did we not really earn anything, but we had to pay tax income on it. So, but no sponsors came knocking on our door. The Tonight Show didn't call. Yet nothing really changed, except for really weird niche people wanted autographs. Like they collect Olympian autographs. So we did that very happily. Like, oh, they want our autographs, but. They would hunt us down at World Cups. They wanted the Olympic medalist signatures, so that was cool. But yeah, no money, no sponsors, nothing came our way, and that kind of brings me to my first real critique of the Olympics, is that everyone is making money besides the Olympians. The Olympians, we have to spend all of our money to qualify and travel, and at most, I was making $2,000 a month because I was ranked so high in the world. That was my best paycheck. But my lowest paycheck ever was $300 a month. And that was expected. You were expected to live off of this, train off of this. And so after London, I thought that would change. I thought we would be getting more money, but nothing came of that. And recently I went home to take care of my mother. She had a replacement knee, and the Olympics were on, in the Beijing Winter Olympics, and we were just watching. It was 24/7 coverage, and all of that, and none of the athletes get any of that. NBC reported a $2 billion profit from the 17 days of the Tokyo Olympics. And also the Olympic, IOC, International Olympic Committee, in 2013 to 2016, they revenued $5.7 billion. So there's lots of money being made, but just nothing for the athletes who are, and not only that, but we're making money. So right now, I'm literally sporting Ralph Lauren and Nike, and while they gave us these clothes, we are basically just walking advertisements for them. Like Ralph Lauren, they give us, for the opening ceremonies, we're walking in these nice, and nobody really wears those outfits ever again. So we're just walking advertisements for Ralph Lauren. This is what I mean. Not only are we not making money, but we're making money for different corporations and advertisements. And so that was something that was sort of sitting in the back of my mind when I was younger, but it definitely became more and more prevalent. The older I got, the more I was in the sport, the more important money became. So that brings me to my second critique of the Olympics, which is the corruption and politics that cloud over, that really cloud the athletes' abilities to be there, efforts and abilities to be there. For instance, just the increasing price tag to host the Olympics is enough to know that something went wrong. There's rife with briberies from people who want to host the Olympics. And for instance, in the Rio Olympics in 2016, a previous governor, a Rio de Janeiro governor, was guilty and was sentenced to jail for contributing $2 billion to bribe for the Rio to have the Olympics. And there's similar accusations surrounding the Tokyo Olympics. And not only that, but another big scandal or corruption is the Russian Federation was banned to fence or to compete in the Olympics. I always say fence whenever I'm talking about anything. To compete at the Olympics, but yet they were still allowed to compete under the International Russian Olympics, IOC, IOR, wait, I can't remember now. But it's still Russia in the name, and they were still had the colors of the Russian flag in there. So they were still allowed to compete even though they had a statewide scandal of doping and drug usage, and it's whenever you're an athlete and you see that the Russians are still allowed. My sister literally fenced one of the Russians in Tokyo. She lost by one touch. It was very sad. But it kind of ruins a lot of the Olympic spirit. Everyone, it's to have a clean sport and it seems cheating. It feels like cheating, and it really ruins a lot of the efforts made by athletes who are playing right, who are not cheating. So those are huge problems, I think, in the Olympics. But what can be done is really the next step. I think that the next step is finding some way to make the Olympics into a 21st century event. It needs to evolve. For instance, maybe decentralizing the Olympics, having 5 sports at different parts of the world is an option, and definitely athletes need to be paid. I mean, athletes in this time, in this age, definitely, we're just always expected to just be happy that we're representing our countries, which we are very happy, but we can't live off of happiness. So these are some suggestions that can be made to help change some of the issues of the Olympics. But I really want to kind of end this with my experience at the Tokyo Olympics, because I think that's a very interesting part, because it's such a unique Olympics. I mean, it's never happened before that we competed in a pandemic. So I I'll talk about it when it first got postponed. Fencing is a whole year process of qualifying for the Olympics. We were on the second to last Olympic qualifier in Budapest, Hungary, in March of 2020, when we were deciding if we wanted to go to the next World Cup to finish up the qualifying process, the last World Cup. But they literally called us and said, well, US is shutting down. US is shutting its borders. Hungary is shutting its borders. So we literally had to change our flights for the next morning, early morning. We were kind of joking that we were fleeing. We had all of our bags early in the morning, taxi drivers like trying to get home. And then we just came home after that, and the US shut down several months. That everything was shut down. The only option we had was to train outside at a track, and that's what we did. We trained every day on a track outside with only just our coach and one other person, so it was very small. We had masks, and that was our life for 2 months. There was no information at all if the Olympics were happening. It was so unreal. But when we finally got the notification that the Olympics were being postponed officially, and that was only literally a few months before the Olympics happened. All of my friends had already bought their tickets. One of them's here today. Everyone bought tickets. Everyone was going to go to this Olympics. This Olympics was going to be amazing. So when we got that news, we were like, okay, well, what do we do now? We continued to train because we had no news. We didn't know what was going on. So we continued to train throughout the summer on this track still. And when things slowly opened up, because it's Texas, it's opened up. I'm from Texas. And we went back to fencing, and I just could not hold it together anymore. I could not train as hard as I was training before, not knowing what was happening in the future, no competitions in the future. I just could not do it. So my sister decided to go to med school. We were all gonna wait till after the Olympics to do all the things we wanted to do. So she decided to just go to med school, and I decided what I wanted to do was go on my van. I converted a van and traveled with my dogs, and it was something that was so amazing that I really, really needed. It helped my mental health, and I could not have survived otherwise. I just went out into the middle of nowhere with my dogs and forgot about all the problems. But this is catching up. This was 4 months, and then catching up to February, like my coach called. So I essentially went from nothing to starting from February to July, just training my heart, less than 5 months, training my heart out, and because I trained so hard from nothing that I got injury after injury after injury, and I had lost motivation, and it was very, very tough for me. And that's something that my last point about the Olympics is the stigma of mental health and how important that is. We all know that Simone Biles came out and withdrew from one of the competitions. She got eaten alive online, and calling her weak. And even though this is keyboard warriors that don't know anything, so this stigma, this mental health is becoming more and more important in everyone's lives. And the pandemic, I think, really rushed all of that. I mean, it was going to happen anyways, but definitely the pandemic rushed all of that. And Olympians are supposed to be these heroes. They're supposed to have this, victory story. And but I think a really important part to talk about is the flip side of the struggles and not necessarily winning, not necessarily doing the best, but trying your hardest and knowing that, at the end of the day, even if you lose, it doesn't make you a loser. It doesn't make you less than a human being. And that's what I was struggling with forever, is that fencing, it felt like my identity. I was a fencer, and if I lost, then I was a loser. And that was something I really struggled with my whole fencing career. But this pandemic and this Olympics really put it in perspective, and I really understood that fencing I'm more than fencing. I'm more than what I do. I'm more than my job. What I really want to focus on is being happy in my day-to-day life. And I've really tried ever since after Tokyo, and it felt like someone punched me after Tokyo was over, because I didn't even have time to process what had happened. But I knew that a really common question is, do you want to continue fencing? And for a long time it was no, not possible, I'm done. But there was something in the back of my brain that said, take back your happiness, and that's what I ultimately ended up deciding was taking back my happiness with the sport and with the Olympics, and I really am trying to to help whoever I can help with my experience, and to give advice when needed, and that's why I'm staying in the sport, and I'm staying. Olympics is not something I'm focusing on, but it's still the Olympics. It's still an amazing opportunity, amazing experience, and I just have the ability to make critiques, and this conversation I think needs to happen more in order for change to happen. And unfortunately, I'm not like my millennial friends where they can be fired from a job. I can't really be fired from the Olympics. So I'm going as day by day, and trying to just find my happiness day by day, and that's really what I wanted to end on, is mental health, and how the Olympics is not my identity, and to think about the Olympics in a critical view really changed my perspective on the Olympics and my life. So.